Okay. Better living through technology. If you're just turning this on, been struggling with how to not have all the participants show up, and yet they are. So there you go. Tonight, we're looking at the 8th of the 8 steps, right concentration. And we just finished a meditation that was basically just after some preliminaries, some calm abiding, focusing on the breath for the entire period of the meditation. I'm curious as to those, well, no, some people have turned off the camera, so looking at the chapter on concentration that Thich Nhat Hanh provides us, and the one that Bhante Gunaratana provides us, they both get fairly heavily into states of absorption and concentration, referred to often as the jhanas, that are frankly beyond me. I wouldn't even try to explain them. I have some very small experience in that, which I'll probably mention along the way here. But this evening, I'm mainly going to be working from Gil Fronsdal's book on his chapter on the eighth factor, right concentration. And he starts off with a quote, as he usually does.
Yeah. Okay.
Could you all mute yourselves? Thank you. And the quote is from the Middle Length Discourse. It says, when the Buddha knew that the householder's mind, the householders, that's us, was ready, soft, free from hindrances, joyful and bright, he expounded the teaching special to the Buddhas. So the teacher, the Buddha, needs a receptive mind, one that is concentrated and is ready, soft, free from hindrances, joyful and bright, to really move into the deep teachings. And Fronsdal says, right concentration prepares the mind for deep understanding and profound letting go. This occurs when the mind is, again, ready, soft, free from hindrances, joyful and bright. All of the teachers speak to this point, that although the concentration is the final of the 8 steps on the Eightfold Path, it is not an end to itself. It isn't the end. It isn't the final thing. And in fact, it's really a preparation that allows a deep penetration into insight questions. In the sutras and in the teachings of some teachers, a great deal of time and attention can be paid to moving into states of deep concentration or absorption. And I'll briefly relate my experience with that. I think you may have heard this before, but just in case. Using Lee Brasington, who has taken the jhanas as a special interest of his, and he teaches that along with, interestingly, very often along with metta. And there is some disagreement between teachers about exactly what the jhanas are and how you can tell which one you're in and so forth. But in Lee Brasington's teachings, the process is of concentrating on a single focus initially. And what he uses is the breath right here. It's a very subtle place to feel the breath, especially when the breath is moving very slightly or very slowly. Kind of easier to feel it in the abdomen. You really have to allow your attention to be clearly present to it there at the nostrils. And you leave it there until you begin to experience I think the way he puts it is pleasurable sensations, because you're moving to the joy and rapture section of these of concentration. So I did that and moved to the pleasant sensations, and then that becomes the object of meditation until those pleasant sensations become overwhelming, and they do. But to do that, it took me I can't even remember exactly. I was doing a month long on my own, and I believe it was the middle of the second week when I actually experienced that state. And it's a very real state. There's no mistaking it. The energy moving in the body was intense. Blissful sound is too quiet a word. The initial state is quite intense to the point of it being too much, but it really is a intensely pleasurable state of body and mind. Then moving into what Lee describes as the second and third states, the jhanas, it moves from this rapturous, intense flooding of energy into a more pleasantly accepting sense of contentment. And eventually even that begins to fade out, and there's this sense of evenness that really I find pleasurable. But when I say 11 days into my retreat, I was literally sitting about 8 hours a day. Now, maybe I'm slow, that's certainly possible. Although I've heard others with similar stories. So the question arises, do you want to invest in that way in terms of time, when the idea here is that, as Lee would say, that kind of concentration supercharges your capacity for insight. And I definitely think there's something to that. On the other hand, I don't think it's necessary to cultivate that level of concentration to develop an increased capacity for these deep insights. But I do think that the tools that are used in terms of mindfulness, attention, awareness of what are called the hindrances that we've already talked about, and so on, is really sufficient. And my teacher, Fred Epsteiner, he does not teach these, and he never tried to dissuade me from checking them out, but he also doesn't see them as necessary. And they can be distracting. And some people can get really tied up in the lovely feelings and visual displays. I mean, it can be quite impressive. So enough about that aspect of concentration. And continuing with what Gil Fronsdal has to say here. He says, when we know how a concentrated mind is part of the Eightfold Path, we can use the possibility of the peaceful, expansive mind as a guidepost along the path. So here we are. What we just do, we put our attention on a single thing. And whenever we were distracted from it, we came back to it. And yet he describes a expansive mind. And although a little paradoxical, these two things really are connected to develop the capacity to have the mind be where we ask it to be with our intention, as we often do in our meditations. After we've spent some time doing that, we then open. And we simply sit with all that is arising and falling away. And that begins the, the process, or process you want to call it, of insight. We start to recognize that everything that arises also leaves. Impermanence is right in your face. So just as a small example, that becomes the insight that the concentration allows you to see increasingly clearly. He then says, rather than straining with striving and expectations, we cultivate receptive readiness. I mentioned this earlier before we did our meditation, that the concentration that's described here is not the clench your teeth, furrow your brow, sweat coming down, and concentrating. It isn't like that. In fact, there's so much desire tied up. I'm trying to get somewhere, that the very desire itself won't allow the concentration to be present. So rather than straining, he says, with striving and expectations. That was one of the really interesting things about that little jhana practice I experienced, was if I had the desire for the jhana to happen, which was why I was sitting, or any expectation that it would, then my mind was not peaceful and expansive. Desire was present. So in this concentration, we're just placing the mind on this object, or perhaps on no particular object, without a desire for anything particular. If a desire arises, it maybe we can just say, like any other thought, it arises and it passes away. It bubbles up, it bubbles away. It can happen in a flash, you don't even remember it. At other times, thoughts arise, desires arise, aversions arise, that we may need to address. And again, the concentration practice is not the place to move into an investigation of thoughts and feelings. We put our attention back. Nonetheless, at least in my experience, there are times when things arise that I need to remind myself that this desire I have is arising from somewhere, that doesn't really belong to me, that all the desires in the world have never really brought me anything in particular. They tend to be distracting, and just remind myself it's just that. It isn't anything to hook onto, even when it really seems to have hooks on it. To just acknowledge the flimsy, I guess that's a good word for it, insubstantial nature ultimately, when we look at these things that can seem so powerful at times, that you look at them, there's nothing much there, really. And very often, that little process itself can allow these things to move on their own, where I don't have to do anything. Trying to block them or push them away, that directly is a desire. I want this to go away. Well, sorry, that's a desire. That is one of the hindrances. And so concentration sometimes is described by an absence of hindrances. Another way of looking at it. In some of the sutras, there's a speaking of solitude or seclusion, maybe the word that is used. And many teachers say the seclusion that's being referred to there is not from honking car horns or whatever else might be going on in the world. The seclusion is from our own hindrances that arise in us. If the car horn is honking outside and we're meditating and the thought is rising, I sure wish that guy would stop honking his horn, now we have a desire. Or an aversion, depending on which way you want to look at it. But aversions ultimately are desires too, a wish for something not to be there. Whereas if there is a honking horn and it's just a honking horn, or for that matter, it's just a sound we're aware of, we're aware when it's there, or aware when it's not, and we don't get tied up in it, it doesn't have that power. So he continues, we let go deeply so that the mind can be free of tension, letting go. By understanding the value of a soft mind, we're less likely to get tense as we practice. Fronsdal and so many teachers just say over and over again, concentration is primarily an exercise in relaxing and letting go, not in tensing up the way we so often think about it in our culture. When we remember the need to become free of the hindrances, he said, we're less easily taken in by their authority. When it arises and you say, oh, I know you, I know you. Suddenly the power of that, whatever it might be that's there, dissipates. We're less easily taken in by their authority. And when we understand the role of joy and mental brightness on the path, and you may recall that was one of the qualities, two of the qualities that the Buddha was looking for in this householder that he wanted to teach, was a joyfulness and a brightness. When we understand the role they play on the path, we will be quicker to recognize and support these states. I mean, here comes our mindfulness again, that it's not just the hindrances and the difficulties, frustrations or irritabilities that might arise, and we want our mindfulness to send a little flag up about. We also want to recognize and support our joy, our clarity, our brightness, if you want to put it that way. So he says, right concentration moves us inward toward experiencing progressively deeper well springs of stillness and clarity. That word stillness is an interesting one. There's a silence of a similar nature when you use it in that way. Spaciousness also can come in like that, because this stillness doesn't mean that things might not be happening within it, but nonetheless, it's still there. Of course, the less we have going on, the more easily we can recognize that. The activity arises from that, and it's not like it is either or. Anyway, let's see here. What have I done? He says this. With right concentration, the mind becomes unified as it shifts from being scattered, disorganized, and agitated to become calm and centered. And I think we all experience that to some degree, at least, as we move through a meditative session, at least some of the time. And that was part of what I was asking this evening when I said, before we sort of end this session, how's your mind now compared to how it was when you first began the process of that placing the attention gently on the breath, one way or the other? When agitated, the mind easily jumps between bodily sensations, emotions, moods, thoughts, daydreams, desires, external events, and our reactions to what we are experiencing. Each of us could have written that sentence. I mean, we all know that. We experience it all the time, jumping around. When concentrated, the mind settles down, stays centered and undistracted. As we relax into a focused attention, there's a growing experience of unification, of feeling whole with all our faculties working in harmony. Relaxation and wholeness generate a feedback loop. Concentration, unification relax the body. The relaxed body supports further concentration. When concentration calms and brightens the mind, the calm and brightness sharpens concentration further. When concentration evokes joy or rapture, the joy provides incentives to further deepen the concentration and stillness. So it kind of keeps on rolling on itself in various kinds of ways. It takes patience and consistent practice. For most people, concentration develops slowly, perhaps even imperceptibly, with daily meditation practice. It can be useful to assume that only 25% of developing concentration is the intentional effort to stay present and focused. And that's what we think we're doing. I'm going to stay present. I'm going to stay focused on my object of meditation. I'm going to return to it when I'm distracted. Another 25% of the practice is an attitude of equanimity and receptivity. I'm receptive, I'm curious, I'm aware of what's happening, my mindfulness is present, my attention is placed on my object. When I become distracted, it does not upset my equanimity. It's just something that is there like anything else. Oh, that's distraction, I return, so on. And a full 50% of concentration practice consists of letting go and relaxing. All meditation practices develop concentration. Some as a primary purpose, others as a byproduct. He mentions here breathing, loving kindness practice, and then the still another way of developing concentrated, settled, undistracted mind can be focusing on the changing nature of present moment experience without emphasizing any particular object, which is what we do when we move out of that focus on the breath to allowing awareness of everything that is arising, passing away. It comes, it goes, it changes always. There's no particular object we're paying attention to. Let's see. You know what? I was thinking of doing this all in just tonight, but I think I'm going to stop. Maybe we'll do one more on concentration, because there's some other things he talks about, I think, that are worth bringing up. So we will do that next week. And I will bow out for now and see if I can figure out how to turn